Ethan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Rob. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Let me tell you, no more than me, and here's why. You were born in Brooklyn in 1969. I was born in Brooklyn in 1966, and I'm sure that we're going to have a lot to talk about. I was born in Williamsburg, which was kind of a shithole back then at the time, and now it's the place. My daughter, I have I also have a 24-year-old daughter, and she messaged me the other day, and she said, "Dad, I want to move to Williamsburg." I'm like, she lives in LA.
I have to correct you on the date. I was
Tell
born
me.
a little bit later, but the experiences of Brooklyn are exactly the same. I like to tell people that I lived in Brooklyn before it was cool to live there, and that doesn't mean that I was a trendsetter in any way. Like, Brooklyn was a rough and tumble place when I grew up. So I was born in 1980. So I lived there through the 80s and 90s in Brooklyn, where early 90s, I mean, were very similar to, I think, what you dealt with in the 70s there, and lots of fighting and,
It was absolutely a crazy time. But you don't have a trace of Brooklyn in you. Where did it go?
It got washed away the first 2 weeks of college at at the University of Pennsylvania. So there's an interesting story there. So my dad, who also grew up in Brooklyn, and he grew up, fist fighting and all of that good stuff. My senior year before I left for college, he said to me, "There's one final, very dramatic, one final thing I'm going to have you do. It's my last gift before you leave the world." Or Brooklyn. And he's like, he signed me up for boxing lessons, not like boxing lessons, but I joined like an old school boxing gym,
right,
that like trained Golden Glove fighters. And the irony here is that I was going to this Ivy League super fancy school in Pennsylvania where, fist fighting just doesn't happen, but he seemed to feel like he had to give me this skill before I left. So anyway, I got to Penn and was missing a tooth, not because of a fight. I had dental implant surgery.
Oh, okay.
And I was wearing a cutoff shirt. And after a week or so of getting, strange looks, and I'm not a tall guy, but there were like 6'4" guys parting ways when they heard me speak. After I got a little bit fed up with that and people asking me to say coffee a bunch of times, it just magically went away. And it only comes back when I curse.
Isn't it funny? Like my wife will say to me, we'll go back to New York, and I'll go, I don't know, Little Italy or something. And she'll be like, "Oh my God, like, what the hell happened to you? You sound like you're in a Bronx Tale." Just, there's something about it that triggers it. I want to talk about your dad a little bit. We had, I thought, similar dads, but then your dad or my dad took a left turn from each other, and I'll explain what I mean in a minute. My dad was a chain smoker, like yours was. But where one of us took a left turn is that your dad taught you how to go internal and how to meditate, which is extremely sort of like unusual, I think, or unconventional for that time in certainly a Brooklyn chain smoking dad is not, synonymous with let's go meditate. So Can you give me a little bit of color on your unconventional dad in that way?
Unconventional is exactly the word I use to describe him. On the one hand, he fit the stereotype of a 1950s born Brooklynite, big bushy mustache, heavy accent, watched the Yankees, chain smoked. I like to joke the way he used to drive on the Bell Parkway, which is a parkway for listeners in Brooklyn. He'd have one hand at like 10 o'clock on the steering wheel, and the other hand would be on the horn. And like, that's how he would navigate, and the only time he would take his hand off the horn would be to raise his finger. And so, I mean, and Rob, I mean, you can attest here, this was not unusual where we grew up. When we grew up, this was
survival
culture, right? This was how it worked. And so he had that side to him, but then he'd be I have this great like visual image of him sitting in the lotus position in his bedroom, meditating, often with a cigarette dangling from his from his lips, and no college, or didn't graduate college. Did a year or two at Queens College, but
That's where I
he.
graduated.
Oh, really? Okay,
Me,
there you go.
your dad, and Jerry Seinfeld. That's where we all went there.
It's an illustrious trio.
Yeah.
Um, he ate up that the Eastern philosophy, the New Age culture, and he talked to me a bunch about it, and a lot of it penetrated. Some of it didn't, but a lot of it did. And in some ways, what I find myself doing now is science on a lot of the ideas we started talking about very early on in life.
So, at the risk of stepping into a woo-woo, the woo-woo world here, what, it's interesting because the environment for your dad was, driving, smoking, the finger, that the mustache, the whole thing. But like internally, there was like this other guy, there was like this inner being, and there was this like other thing. So, do you think he just sort of came out that way and that was his path in life? Or do you think that somebody just exposed something to him and said, hey, read this, and it clicked for him? Like, how does that diametrically opposed thing happen in your estimation?
Well, he was super, super intelligent, super bright guy. And I think he had a tumultuous childhood. And, here we're speculating, but my sense is that he was probably searching for tools to manage his emotional life. And some of those ancient practices, Eastern philosophical practices, they talk about tools. And so my guess is that that was part of it. He also had friends who were, got involved in the kind of hippie movement, which was, hard to, I didn't live through that, but it was sweeping. It swept the culture, and it was a quite powerful force. And so I think that probably also had something to do with it. So that's my best guess.
Okay.
But it's interesting you use the woo woo phrase, because he was woo woo and still is. And I mean, we had all sorts of experiences growing up. I remember him one, like friends would go to Yankee games or Shea Stadium, see the Mets. And, one week it was, okay, we're going to go listen to an animal psychic on Long Island. And then another weekend we would go, hey, let's check out sensory deprivation chamber in Howard Beach. And it was just like these, or go to a Native American spiritual festival at Floyd Bennett Field. And these, in retrospect, were really great experiences to have, because it really opened me up to experiencing different kinds of cultures, being exposed to different kinds of ideas, and also recognizing the importance of having some science to really be able to discriminate between the real stuff versus the shtick or the kind of sales pitch. And there's a lot of that out there, right? Like there's a ton of, hey, I'm going to read your, just stuff that isn't grounded in reality, but good salesmanship, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I want to talk about Penn before we get into that world, because I have a lot of questions there. But you went to Penn and you had a significant moment at Penn where you sort of like realized that, introspection is good, but it can also backfire on you. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so one of the earliest lessons my dad taught me was the value of introspection, the capacity to really tap into your inner voice, right? Try to, if you're experiencing a problem, go inside, find a solution, move on. And so this was a capacity that served me really well throughout my childhood and adolescence. I was someone who was always really good at regulating their emotions. I didn't really get stuck. Yeah, it doesn't mean I never experienced negativity. Ask a girl out, she says no, repeat that process 15 times in a row. Like, doesn't feel good, but I never got stuck. But then when I got to Penn and I started taking a course in psychology and actually learning about the science behind introspection, what I discovered was a lot of people benefit a lot of the time from introspection. You can make the argument that our ability to turn our attention inward, to use language to reflect on our circumstances, like this is a quality that has allowed our species to really excel into the apex species that we are. Like we wouldn't be able to build spaceships and land rovers on Mars if we didn't have the capacity to introspect. But this very same tool got a lot of people in trouble. Sometimes it got the same people in trouble who benefited from it in some circumstances. It got them in trouble in other circumstances, leading them to worry and ruminate endlessly about things in ways that could be quite destructive for their health, their well-being, and their relationships. And so this, to me, a light bulb went off. This was a giant puzzle. Why is it that we have this tool, our mind, and more specifically, our ability to introspect and use language as a tool to reflect on our problems and experiences? Why does it work good for us in some situations, but bad in others? And most importantly, when it's not working well, when we find ourselves in the depths of rumination and worry and despair, what can we do to bring that introspective process back on track? What can we do to regain control of our mind, so to speak? And um, I had that like that was a light bulb that went off. And then what happened was I would be, so that happened my freshman year. And then I'd be like walking to parties with my friends at 11 o'clock at night on a Saturday. And I'd be talking to them about this stuff. And they'd be, that you used to call me by my last name, Kross. Why are you talking about this right now? Like we're going to a party. And I'd be talking about this stuff in my spare time when I'd be studying in the bookstore for, a math class or econ. I'd find myself on breaks going to the psychology section and thumbing through books. And at some point I had this epiphany that, hey, if I'm spending my spare time thinking about this stuff and reading about it, why don't I make this my career? What my real, why don't I do this as a job? And so that I went to grad school to figure out how to turn this interest and passion into an actual vocation.
Okay, so let's get back to introspection for just a second. Have you evolved your definition or your idea or your sort of beliefs around it from that moment at Penn through your education and postdoctorate work and all that stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we and I say we, my lab, we've become much more fine grained in a certain sense. The way I think about what I do is it's kind of like mind mechanics. So, what does a mechanic do? A car mechanic opens up the hood and understands how that car works with pinpoint precision down to nuts and bolts and gaskets. Are there gaskets in a car? I'm showing you
Who the
now.
hell knows? I have no
Who
idea.
knows? Okay. So there's stuff
I have
underneath.
I
And
have
then,
a I have a Vespa. I have no idea.
okay, you have no idea. Got it. Well, how all the pieces, my kids would love to hear the Vespa. They just saw that movie, that Pixar movie, Luca, with the
Luca,
what,
Silenzio Bruno.
there you go. Well, maybe we'll talk about that later, because that's all about distant self-talk, which is a tool that is very powerful. So we're mind mechanics. We try to understand how the mind works with pinpoint precision, and introspection is a piece of that puzzle. So one for example, evolution in my understanding of this that happened early on was the recognition that, look, it's not that some people are good at introspection and some people are bad, right? Every person has their own profile of good and bad introspection, which is to say, I may be incredibly good at introspecting and coming up with clear solutions for some problems in my life, but in other situations, I've got a weakness, right? So maybe it's about my kids' health. When something's going wrong with them, it's really hard for me to introspect effectively. I need to use some tools there. But if it's about a problem at work, yeah, no problem. I can keep that clear. Other people may have the exact opposite profile. So I've really moved away from thinking about hey, you're good at introspection and you're bad. I don't think that honors the complexity of all of us. I think we all have our triggers, our chatter triggers, if you will, and they're different. And I think knowing about those subtle differences that characterize us is really important for beginning to think about how to help people deal with their problems of introspection effectively.
All right, so let's dig into that a little bit. Let's get under the hood here now. There are there's languaging that I hear people using more and more often, and it's things like, I never had a good money mindset is a good example of that, right? So there's something in that they have an awareness that the way that they look at money, it probably isn't the healthiest way to go and isn't serving them. And maybe they're not quite so sure what to do with it. Other people may say something like, I just sometimes just have a really hard time believing in myself. I don't know what it is. I wish I had the ability to believe the way you do. So this comes down to the $64,000 question, right? Is it nature or nurture? And maybe we shouldn't give a shit. It doesn't matter. It's there. What do we do about it when we have self-identified that there is chatter that's going on, that it isn't good? How do we silencio Bruno?
Well, nature nurture is always a really hard one to weigh in on. We know that there's a little bit of most psychological tendencies driven by nature and some by nurture. It gets even more complex nowadays because what we've learned relatively recently is that nature and nurture actually combine in really powerful and interesting ways. So when you and I were growing up, we learned that they were in separate boxes, two distinct influences. What we've learned more recently is that our experiences in the world can actually change the way our DNA is expressed. So having certain kinds of experiences can turn on certain genes and turn off others. So actually the two combine. You could think about this as like, imagine having a piano in the different cells of your body. Every cell has a piano. And we all have more or less the same keys on that piano, right? The same DNA. But what makes us unique are the songs that are played on that piano. And our experiences in the world can influence how the piano is played. So there's some striking data, for example, which shows that experiencing chronic chatter, so getting chronic rumination and worry over long periods of time, that actually functions to turn on certain genes that promote inflammation, and it turns off certain genes that we use to fight viruses, antiviral genes. It's wild. And what it means is that our genes are not totally distinct from our experiences in the world. They actually mix in powerful ways. So that just complicates or gives some nuance to this whole nature nurture argument in ways that I think is mind-blowing.
Does that do you mean to say, sorry to interrupt, but do you mean
Yeah.
to say that in real time we can manipulate how the gene expresses itself based upon our state?
Well, for real time, we'd have to dig in a little bit to what that means. In fact, I remember when I was, this was maybe a decade ago, when I was first exposed to this work. There's a great scientist out of LA, Steve Cole, who does some of this work. He gave a presentation. I went up to him after, and I'm like, so how sensitive are these gene effects to our experiences? Does thinking a specific thought turn these keys on and off? And his response, and I don't think anything has changed since he gave me this response, is we are talking about chronic effects. So, if you're experiencing chronic stress, that's when these gene expression changes are really beginning to take hold and take shape. It's not as sensitive as, hey, you do 10 dumbbell curls and you feel your muscle changing, right? If you lift enough heavy weight, those aren't the sense that it is about a chronic kind of experience that is infiltrating our DNA.
Okay, well, my mother
Yeah. She's a chronic experience, probably like mine. Maybe they know each other. Now
I
we're
don't
gonna
I don't think I need to say anything else. I'm just going to put those two words together. You know where I'm going with this, right? I mean,
Brooklyn mother. Oh,
like everything is like the world is coming to an end. Like it's like, oh, like I can't pick up the phone and say, "Mom, what's wrong? What happened? Nothing."
it's so fun, and this is a cultural phenomenon. Every phone call for the past 20 years is, what's wrong? Everything okay? Why do you always have to assume something is wrong when I call? Can I not just call to say hello? And then we
No,
get into an argument. It is
no, you can't.
remarkable. It is
Right.
remarkable.
So that level of
Not good.
worry, not good. Why?
Well, what we know is, so chatter. So, just to give, like, listeners a window into my vocabulary. So
Yep.
what I call chatter is getting stuck in a negative thought loop. I like the term chatter because scientists have used so many different terms to refer to these negative thought loops. It becomes hard to keep them straight. If it's, rumination, that's perseverating over something that happened in the past. Worry is perseverating about something in the future. But in both cases, you're just stuck in this loop. You're like a hamster on an exercise wheel. You're running, you're not getting anywhere. So that's what chatter is. Now, what we know about chatter is that this can impact us in three core domains of life that I would argue really make life worth living for us. It makes it really hard for us to think and perform well at work or at sports. It creates strain in our social relationships, and it undermines our physical health. It exerts a wear and tear on our bodies that predicts things like cardiovascular disease, problems of inflammation, even certain forms of cancer. So, you're talking about performance, right? You're talking about relationships and health. And chatter impacts all three of those. And so if someone is chronically experiencing chatter, that's not a good thing. And you do want to take steps to intervene.
But how do you well, okay. Where does the chatter come from in the first place?
Well, that's back to your 64,000. I would say that might be cheap nowadays in terms of, $64 trillion question.
Right.
Actually, you know what? Here's an interesting statistic to put this in monetary terms for people, which I think is often useful. World Health Organization and the Lancet Global Health, a top medical journal, public health journal, recently put a number on the impact that anxiety and depression, which we know chatter fuels, the impact that has on the US global economy in 1 year. You want to guess what that number is?
Couldn't even begin.
$1 trillion. The yearly impact. That is just the US. That number goes way up when you take into account the global economy, and it's predicted to rise exponentially over the next several years. So this is you say $64,000 question. Where does chatter come from?
It's because I'm
It's
old.
$1 trillion question.
$1 trillion question.
I did a presentation as I sadly, this may give you insight into my financial portfolio. Or the kind of business I do. I had to look up how many zeros were in $1 trillion. I didn't even know. So, it's pretty crazy.
I couldn't do it.
Right? It's not a number we're used to thinking about. So where does it come from? There is data suggesting there's some genetic influence. Certainly environmental stressors can play a role as well. There's a whole lot of mystery though around how those different pieces come together and combine. And in my book, I actually don't spend a lot of time talking about where it comes from because it's really hard to know. Like, we know that parents play a role. Parents help shape the conversations we have with ourselves. So, parenting, socialization, culture, hugely important. But I think where there's an opportunity to really intervene and help people is in communicating what tools exist to help people manage this chatter, right? Teaching people about those tools directly, encouraging people to share those tools with others, with their friends, with their loved ones. I think that's where there's the largest room to have impact, to really move the needle on this $1 trillion problem.
So two things. First is, before I moved to Italy, I'd get up early, like when I was living in LA, and I'm only here for a month, but when I was in LA, I'd get up and I'd journal for 3 pages. Just, I learned this thing called the morning pages, where you just write for three pages. And then I'd go into doing transcendental meditation, just saying a mantra for 20 minutes.
That's what
And
my dad, by the way,
he
that
did
was
TM.
his system. And he took me when I was 5 to New York to do it. And there were mattresses all over the training room floor. And I was like, what are the mattresses for? And he's like, yogic flying, which you may have heard of, but is part of that
No,
whole. Yeah,
I
Google
really,
it.
I need,
Google it. Everyone who's listening, Google yogic flying. This is a thing attached to
were they
TM.
levitated?
Yeah, but I did not witness it, but when I was
Allegedly.
5, my eyes
Allegedly.
my eyes lit up, like.
Wow. I got to hang out with you, Dad. So what is interesting to me is, since I have moved to Italy, and who knows what the placebo effect is, who knows, maybe I don't know what it is. I am surrounded in this country. I can go on for hours and I won't, but I am surrounded with such absolute love and joy, and everybody has coffee in the morning with dessert, and they look like they are off, they have like a croissant in the morning. They look like everybody is dressed like they're on a runway. Dinners are pasta and wine and don't end until 11 o'clock at night. They don't really give much of a shit about making money. They are the most hedonistic culture I've ever been in. I am deeply affected by that and love it. And I have less chatter in my head than I had when I was in the States. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on that. Is it just that it's a new environment, or is it that the way they live here is different and that affects it?
Well, we'd have to do the experiment to confirm, but here's my intuition. My intuition is that you've experienced a dramatic change in the culture that you are living in. A lot of people talk about culture as like the air we breathe. It can be powerful, right? You think about you take in polluted air, that affects your whole body,
Of course,
right? Like,
everything.
the air has changed entirely. And we know that certain kinds of cultures in general, can tune the way we view and experience the world. And there's a lot of data on that, right? Some cultures lead us to be more sensitive to certain kinds of concerns versus others. And as you just described, you're talking about a culture that is all about, what is joie de vivre. I don't know how,
That's
la
it.
dolce vita, right? La dolce vita is the more
It's the
appropriate. It's the
same.
same thing.
They're a little bit more arrogant, but it's the same.
Yeah, same thing. But
Yeah.
well dressed and well fed,
Well
in
fed.
both places. Um, and I mean, it sounds remarkable. Now, every culture, of course, there's a trade-off when you do these things, and you intimated at it with your description, right? Like there's not a focus on as much as professional advancement, maybe, and in Italy or where you are, as opposed to maybe the stock market in New York, the stock exchange, that is. But yeah, that's a cultural level effect. So actually, I've experienced something in the opposite direction, moving from New York, where I did my grad work. I was in New York City, and as you know, Rob, like, New York's an interesting place. It has a stereotype of folks being really gruff, kind of like my dad. Like, I mean, can I curse on this show? Is that
You can
allowed?
curse,
Okay.
curse away.
Curse away. Okay. I won't offend anyone. I mean, my mom, as a term of endearment, refers to me often as a little shit or asshole. As a term of endearment,
Try.
in the same way that I call my kids sweetie, she calls me asshole.
I know.
That doesn't fly in Michigan. Okay.
Have you ever
And it is
have you ever brought a girl home from another state and had her do
my
it?
wife,
It's I'm like,
horrified.
no, 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 no. No. She likes you. Who
That's right.
says that? I'm
Who
like,
says that? It
I'm
is.
like, every mother in New York says that. That's who.
Yes, it's remarkable the level of filth that comes out of the mouth. I mean, you know exactly what I'm talking
Of
about.
course. Of course.
And that's just normal. So you know, I've experienced a different kind of cultural shift. I think New York, you have that kind of abrasiveness, but there's also an intense level of warmth. You know, there's hugging. There's a people look out for you in a way. Am I getting it right? You agree?
You're 100% right, and it's so confusing because those that are uninitiated
Yeah.
think that it's just rude, but they got your back in a way that you don't even like. You know, it's and I tell you what's interesting is I lived in Atlanta. I grew up in New York, and then I moved to Atlanta for 25 years, and then I moved
That's
to
where my
LA.
wife is from.
Oh, she's
So
from Atlanta. Okay, I
yeah.
lived in Buckhead
Okay.
for
Sandy Springs.
right next door. Okay. For 25 years. And then I moved to LA and then I moved to Italy. I did not realize, because I had been out of New York so long, I did not realize how, like, when I met somebody in New York, there was a hug, there was a kiss, it was tactile. When I moved to Atlanta, that was not a thing. It was not like, you know, Nebraska, but it was not like New York at all. So I learned to be less touchy,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Um, and,
Absolutely.
and then when I came to Italy, I had been out for 25 years and I immediately fell right back into hugging and kissing and touching. And I realized how much it meant to me and how much I missed it. And I think things like that really affect you inside in your level of happiness, joy, decrease in chatter and stuff. So I'd love
Yeah.
your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, totally. I had a colleague from Israel do a sabbatical here in Michigan for a year, and he went up and he hugged a colleague of mine, and the colleague was totally taken aback. Whereas where he came from in Israel, which in many ways is similar to Italy in terms of
Very
the
similar.
level of
Yep.
communality, that's just part of it, this rich warmth and embrace. And so cultures vary on those dimensions. And it's not always cut and dry, good versus bad. There are trade-offs, but they can certainly affect us. I mean, the touch factor is an interesting one. I actually talk a little bit about this in Chatter. We know that affectionate touch, when it is welcome, that's an important caveat,
Not creepy.
not creepy, it's a powerful tool. It affects us through a variety of different pathways. There are receptors on our skin that code for affectionate touch, a kind of like petting embrace. And there are automatic biological reactions that occur when we're hugged, when we're embraced. There's a release of different kinds of stress fighting chemicals that occur. There's also at the conscious level, when someone hugs us or, you know, whatever, holds our hand, it also reminds us that, hey, there's someone else out there that really cares for me. I'm wanted. And those are very powerful experiences. If you think about touch, we don't talk about touch very much as a regulatory strategy. Touch is the first way that we are regulated when we come into this world. What happens when a child is born? The first thing that they do after they snip the cord, I didn't watch that part, but they then take the child and they put the child on the mother's chest for skin to skin contact. When our babies cry, we hug and embrace them, right? But at some point, we stop doing that as
Well,
much.
it's gotten weird. You know, look, whatever, not to get into politics, whatever Cuomo did in New York, I don't know what the hell happened. I wasn't there. I have no idea. But it was interesting. I heard a comedian the other day on, he was talking about it. And he said he took the Napolitan defense, which is, I'm from Naples. So like, this is what I do.
Yeah.
There was a part of me, I get it. I'm not saying that he didn't do anything inappropriate. There's a part of me that understands that New York tactile touchiness thing that's out there. You know, you mentioned that there are a lot of really good salespeople that are in the world that are maybe snake oil salesmen that are, my words, not yours, that are like pumping you up and selling
Mhm.
tickets to seminars and tapes and books and all that stuff. Um, some of the stuff that you're talking about is making me think of two people, and I'd love, if you're willing to, and if you have an opinion on these two, or if you know them, I'd love to know your thoughts on the work that they do. The first one is Joe Dispenza. Do you know anything about him? Have you ever heard that name?
Not really.
Okay. Okay. Because he's talking about very similar. It would be worth it for you to check out, because he's talking about how his work with meditation is changing gene expression, and everything he does, he's got tests that he's doing. He's been tracking people over 20 years, and
Mhm.
I'm getting it all wrong, but he does some scientific work. I was wondering if you knew that. And then the other one is Tony Robbins with NLP work, neuro linguistic programming. Any thoughts on that work?
NLP, there are some very interesting techniques that are used in NLP. And I think the question is, not all of them have been put to the scientific test. Now, that doesn't mean that those tools are ineffective, but it also means that we don't know that they are effective. Um, but I think likely some things that are talked about there that really genuinely help people. If we back up a little bit, we shouldn't underestimate the power of what we call good salesmanship or placebo effects. I spend a chapter talking about how powerful placebos can be for helping people regulate their chatter. I mean, it's really, I think what placebos often get a bad rap, right? We often think about placebos as it's the comparison condition against which we gauge the effectiveness of a drug. So if a drug doesn't outperform a placebo, then the drug doesn't make it into the marketplace. But what we know is that placebos themselves can be quite powerful, especially for helping people with the kinds of chatter related issues that we face, anxiety, depression, like giving a person a sugar pill, telling them that, hey, this is going to help you feel better. If they believe you, that helps with mild to moderate forms of depression. It helps relieve Parkinson's disease. It helps relieve headache symptoms, gastrointestinal distress, and there are no side effects associated with those placebos. So I think what we want to do is we want to respect the power of placebo, but then do better than just the placebo. So I think we want to have real tools that have some active ingredients that help people with their chatter. And then we want to supercharge those real tools by giving people that placebo effect as well. Hey, these things are really going to help you if you do them. And there's no deception involved there, right? Because you're giving someone something that will help them. But I think that's the route to really helping folks. So I mean, individuals, I don't know, there's a range of things that these people probably talk about. I can tell you there are a couple of beliefs out there that are promoted that don't have much scientific basis, that I think are important for folks to be aware of. One big one that I spent a lot of time talking about is the benefits of venting. There's a whole lot of work, a lot of people who say, hey, when you're upset, just vent, just express emotions, freeze a milk carton, get a hammer and bash it away. Go to one of those, I don't know if you've heard of these new
I've seen them.
Rooms where you just break stuff.
Breaking shit. There's cars in there, and you just like hammering the hell out of it.
Yeah. Look at those people. Watch them do that. Do they look calm when they're
They
engaged in
don't.
that
They look
behavior?
crazy.
They look crazy. So we know that venting about your emotions, it can be really good for friendships and connections. Call me up, Rob, the next time your mom calls you a little shit, and let me know how you're doing, about what you're feeling, why you're upset. Our friendship is going to get more intense. It's going to strengthen because you know that you could turn to me and I'm there for you. I'm going to validate what you're feeling. I'm going to normalize, hey, my mom does the same thing. That sucks. But if all I do is let you vent, what ends up happening is you and I feel really close and connected, but you leave that conversation just as upset because all you've done is harped on the negatives. So venting alone actually isn't useful for chatter. And there's data which shows that it can promote feelings of anxiety and depression over time. So what you want to do in a productive relationship when it comes to your chatter is find someone who does take some time to hear you out, to listen, but at the appropriate time helps you look at that bigger picture, helps you go broader to kind of put this in perspective. Look, it's not your mom. All moms in New York are like that. They don't mean it, and so forth and so on.
Well, let's talk about, like, what I'm going to coin here, like the Woody Allen analogy, for lack of a better word. Like, he's been public about the fact that he's been on some therapist's couch twice a week for 100 years, right?
Yeah.
Is there any value in looping the same problem that you had when you were 20 years old? Like, at some point, is there a
No.
statute
I mean,
at
this
some
is
point, is there like a statute of limitations on childhood trauma? Like, when does it end?
well, there's variability in the sense that we're all distinct. However, there is a popular belief, and it was a belief that was promoted initially by Freud and carried on over the years. By the way, Freud had many amazing things to say, so this is not a knock against him on the whole, but the idea that the way to emotional salvation is by delving into your past weekly on a couch, not looking at the person who you're talking to over years and years and years. We know that there are more effective ways to help people. Sometimes you may have to dip into your past to deal with something. If you find that there's an experience that is continuing to promote distress in the present, and you feel the need to go back to it to make sense of that experience, then I think a competent therapist will help you do that. But we don't always have to do that, right? Like, your COVID anxiety isn't necessarily rooted in some early childhood experience that needs to be explored. Sometimes it's rooted in the fact that, hey, you may just be overestimating your risk, or thinking about something slightly irrationally that we could correct through small shifts in the way you think about things. So I don't want to suggest that we should never think about the past. That doesn't make sense. Like, there are times when it does make sense to deal with negative past experiences. We feel the need to work through them. But it is not the rule that the only way to feel better is to shift through the past. That is not the case. And there are several counterexamples that demonstrate that.
All right. So as we sort of reach the top of the hour here, I'm going to ask you some questions about your own life. Some of them are going to be weird, so just roll with it if you're down. We'll start off with some easy ones. In what ways did Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, affect your life?
Powerfully affected my life. Read it my sophomore year in college, and what it exposed me to was the following. Viktor Frankl was a guy who had everything taken away from him. He lost his family. He was in a concentration camp during the Holocaust. And yet he managed to reframe his experiences in ways that ultimately allowed him to not just endure that tragedy, but like thrive ultimately over time. And so it spoke to me to our amazing capacity to change the way we think about our circumstances to live better lives. And that stuck with me. And I read that book every year. I sign it every time I teach my seminars on these topics. So
it's so
really
good.
Powerful book.
Yeah, it's so good. It's the number one book when I ask people what number. It's the book that always comes up. What do people often get wrong about your work?
Well, I spent a lot of time talking about distancing and this idea that when you're overcome with chatter, it can be really useful to get some mental space to think about the experience more objectively. And some people reflexively think about distance as avoidance, the idea that, hey, you're just trying to avoid focusing on the experience and not feeling emotion. And that couldn't be further from the truth. When I say distance, what I'm talking about is giving people a tiny bit of mental space so that they're not zoomed in on the problem so narrowly that they can't think about it differently at all. But when I pull people back in our studies, people are still feeling emotion. They're still fully engaged with the experience. They're just not as overwhelmed. So distance doesn't equal avoidance.
You just go in higher level.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. What is a rule that you have for yourself that you're never going to break? Like this is a rule. I just don't break this.
There are lots of them. Let's see. What should I mention? Work with people that I like.
That's a great one. I love that. What new behavior or habit has most improved your life?
Walking to work every day, rain or shine. And it's improved my life in a few ways. It keeps the waistline in check. And B, it also, I'm fortunate to live in a very non-Brooklyn-esque neighborhood filled with lots of greenery. And as I talk about in my book, green spaces are nature's way of helping us deal with chatter. And so having that 15, 20 minutes each way, each day to take in my surroundings, think broadly, it's just an incredible time.
What is an unusual or absurd thing that you love? People think it's weird, but I love it.
I take a bath every single night.
You're a bath guy.
I'm a bath guy. It unwinds me. It helps me think. I love it. And I hear it's more common in Europe among men, but
I got a buddy who's just I got a buddy who's he's a CEO of a big company, and we joke about it all the time. He's also he also has a soap habit. He's like addicted to. You got the same thing. So bath guys and soap guys.
Well.
He likes a nice soap. We went to Israel together, and like I literally spent my entire trip finding like Dead Sea shit.
Yeah, you should connect us.
I'm gonna have to connect you.
We could exchange stories.
If you could spend 1 month anywhere in the world, where would it be and why?
You know the
Italy.
answer to that question, Rob.
Well, I'm gonna hook you up.
Italy for culture, food, and just experience.
All of it. Okay, we're going to do a speed round in the remaining 5 minutes we have. It's sort of like a first thing that comes to mind round. What would your friends say is one of your superpowers?
My ability to maintain a positive attitude, disposition.
Do you collect anything, or have you ever collected anything?
Collected comic books when I was a kid.
Other than Man's Search for Meaning, what book have you reread the most?
The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay by Michael Chabon, which, if you haven't read it, Rob, in particular, you should read it. It's a story of this amazing story about these two cousins who grew up in Brooklyn and the exploits they have throughout their lives, love triangles and comic books. And it won a major literary award years ago. Great book.
I'll totally read it. What's your guilty pleasure?
Nightly baths.
Nightly baths. Last question. Let's change it up a little bit. What one question would you like to ask me?
How did you manage to, with a young child, move your whole life to paradise? That's a big move that at your phase of life is not something that most people do. How did you swing that?
It was slow and then fast. It was me one day sitting there saying, I have an impulse to do something. That impulse is to go to Italy, but I don't have the slightest idea if I can go there legally. I don't know how I would, like everything that you're asking. And so I went, to your point, super high, like 100,000 foot level. And I started writing, and I wrote, I see myself walking down cobblestone streets. And like, that was it for the morning. And then the next morning I did another 15, 20 minutes of writing. And what came out was, I dropped the kid off at the bus stop, and she gets on the bus headed to a schoolhouse, something like that. And then by the end of about 2 or 3 months, I wake up in the morning to the sounds of church bells ringing. I meditate and journal, and then I get my wife and I get Sophia ready and put her into the International School of Florence uniform, getting her ready to start her day. And then my wife and I drop her off at the bus, and we look at the bus as it's pointing towards the hills of Tuscany for her day of education. And then we go to a cafe in the morning and have coffee. And then I go on and on. And so I wrote a story about what it looked like. And the story started with amorphous blobs that then went down to 90,000 feet, 20,000 feet, and got super granular. Once it got super granular, then I was like, okay, this is good. Then I got pictures of what that story was exactly. Like the school, I had the picture of the school and the teachers in the school, but very specific. And then I hung that in my office, and my wife and I had a bottle of wine at night, and we talked about it. And then it was, okay, well, what's the first thing we need to do? First thing we need to do is, can we legally go there? And then we found a lawyer, and then we talked to the lawyer, and then it became a to-do list of when we had to do it. And we set a goal to do it in 2 years, but because the vision was so clear, 2 years was compressed down to probably 4 months. And then everything just started snowballing. Then the attorney said, hey, I've got some friends that are in the international school, and there's a WhatsApp group called the Bobby group. And I'm like, what's a Bobby group? He said, well, in Tuscany, the word for dad is Bobby, so it's a WhatsApp group for just the dads. So then I went in and said, hey, I'm looking for a place in Florence. And then all of a sudden I got the hair cutter, the everybody gave me everything I needed, and the real estate agent. And it was like the resource that I needed. And it just unfolded. Nice. And then one day we went, that's it. We're moving. And then we just put it all together, and it just happened. But to answer the question, it started, to your point, super high, got super clear. And then once we were clear, we knew what we wanted. Then the execution of it was like, it was a literal to-do list.
Amazing.
Follow my stories on Instagram, because I video all day long on what it's like here. And it's going to change. There's only one first time. I'm only here for a month now, so everything is just new for me. I'll be a little jaded, I'm sure, in a year. But right now, if you're interested in this sort of thing,
I'd love to. I'm going to do it right after we're done.
You'll follow my.
I would, if I had to make a prediction, I would predict that you're not jaded in a year.
Okay, good. I'll leave you with this. Every single dad that I've met at the school, they have a junior school, and it goes all the way to high school, from kindergarten to high school. I have met people who've been here for a year and people who've been here for 15 years. And my attorney, who's also children is in the school, said to me, I said, out of all the people that you've helped come from America that's moved here, has any of them gone back? He said, I'm doing it 15 years, not one. I said, no shit. He said, not one person has ever returned. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, I mean, look at the view from your balcony. That it's just
crazy.
It's just remarkable. I mean, you're at the epicenter of where culture was born. I mean, the Renaissance, just amazing. So I'm gonna tune in.
I'll tell you what I did. I'll leave you with this. I wanted to do this right, so I hired an Italian teacher to come twice a week to teach us Italian, and I hired a tour guide to come twice a week, so that I don't just look at the buildings and go, I don't know what the hell happened here. So she's teaching us. So we're learning the language, and we're learning that, and eating pasta helps too.
Well, if you have any, my when I'm not bathing, the other release I have is cooking. So if you got any great recipes or tips,
I'll pass them along. Ethan, this was one of my more favorite podcasts. I hope it was great for you as well. Do you have any final words, suggestions, or an ask for the people that are listening?
Well, if you're interested in learning more about chatter, check out my website, www.ethancrossthek.com. Lots of info about me, the book, and tools that are freely downloadable. Yeah, I guess my ask for people who are listening is to, if you're experiencing chatter, make a commitment to try some of these tools out in your own life, and pass them on to others, because there's an opportunity to help. And this was super fun conversation on my end too. So I'm really glad we had a chance to do it.
Awesome, buddy. I'll link everything up in the show notes, and people will know exactly how to get there.
Fantastic. Enjoy Italy.
Thanks, buddy.